Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor here at Lincoln Square. And joining me today is Skye Perryman. She is the president and CEO of Democracy Forward. She has nearly 2 decades of legal experience advancing civil rights, healthcare access, and social justice. And previously, she was the chief legal officer at the American College of OBGYNs, and she is also nationally recognized for championing racial equality. Thank you so much for being here with us, Skye.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I want to get to all of the lawsuits that Democracy Forward is involved with in suing the Trump administration. And just by listing them, that would probably take care of our time for today. But I wanted to jump into one in particular. It's a suit that you filed very recently against the Trump administration over its handling of the Epstein files.
Yes.
So I was just wondering if you could talk with us about that one.
Yes, absolutely. So we are interested not just in the files. I think, everybody's interested in the files. The president said he was going to turn the files over. He hasn't. There's a lot of work that's being done by Congress and others to try to force that. And then, of course, lawsuits can help as well. But we filed a first of its kind case, also seeking communications between members of the administration about what they're covering up and what they're hiding, right? We expect there are communications. We're seeking communications between the White House press office and the Department of Justice and FBI. This is an administration that has bragged about, honestly, how it's politicized those agencies, and he views these agencies as his own personal attorneys. So we know that there are communications. The government could have said, we don't have anything to show you. We don't have any communications. They didn't. And they also didn't respond in a timely fashion. And so under a law called the Freedom of Information Act, which every, all Americans have the ability to request information, we are in court to force the release of documents and information about this administration's cover-up.
And what will be the first step that you expect in that case?
Well, we filed the case, and then we moved for what's called a summary judgment very quickly on this question of expedited processing. The law actually recognizes that when there is something that has extraordinary media interest, that has an extraordinary public interest, people need to find out what their government is up to. The law recognizes that. And so we have challenged the administration's failure to grant that expedited processing of these requests. The judge has already issued a schedule, so it's going to move pretty quickly. We can come back and keep you updated, but there'll be a series of arguments and briefs before the court. But then the hope, of course, is that the lawsuit will force the government to release records that they've been withholding.
Right. And of course, it was a longstanding promise for Donald Trump to release the Epstein files.
Right.
So it's a little odd, I guess, that his administration is fighting you on this.
Well, that's sort of the premise, right, of the whole case. Is we Donald Trump is the one that made the Epstein files and Epstein the sort of conspiracy and the spectacle that it was. He campaigned on this. He said he was going to release things. Then, like everything he said on the campaign trail, he's come in and done just the opposite. On the campaign trail, he also said he didn't know anything about Project 2025, and he's come in and put all these people that wrote it in charge, and they're seeking to implement it. So that is what we're interested in, is what is going on. What are they hiding from people? What is about this about face? And so I do think the courts have been, in this administration, but in prior administrations as well, the courts have been they're not always reliable for everything we want, but they've been very reliable in enforcing transparency with these records acts. And so we're confident that we're going to be able to find something out to help the American people make sense of this.
So Democracy Forward has definitely been leading the charge on so many lawsuits against the Trump administration. I mean, I have a list, and it looks like upward of about 20 different cases, maybe more.
filed about 100 cases.
100. Okay, so I'm way off there.
No,
I think I just got the highlights, but I mean, it's on all of the issues that have been in the headlines. The Trump administration blocking legal oversight of the immigration detention facilities, invoking the Alien Enemies Act, the freeze on federal funding, that came at the very beginning, and so on and so forth. It's hard to know where to start, but if you could talk with us, about some of these cases, why you filed and where things are at, I think that would be very helpful, because I know in particular, one thing that we hear from our viewers is, the Trump administration, they're just doing a barrage of things, and what's being done to stop it. And
right.
This is one thing that's being done to stop
Absolutely. Well, the courts, look, the lawyers are at work, and we're in court every single day, and so are many other organizations and the state AGs, to stop what is unlawful and harmful activity. And by the way, activity that is really unlawful and harmful for all Americans, whether you're, liberal, conservative, progressive, moderate, independent, whatever. These are things that harm all of us. And the courts are a really important tool. They're not the only tool, and they're not they're not going to totally save us, but the courts are a very important tool for people to be using. So just let me take a big step back, and then we can talk about some of the specific cases. We've been at this administration's been in power for a little over 200 days. And there have been over 400 federal court cases filed against the administration. And that is not because lawyers don't have anything to do. And it's not because people are particularly comfortable suing this president, given how retaliatory he is, right? It's because it's been essential to bring these cases to protect the rights of people. Judges that were appointed by President Trump himself, judges that were appointed by Republicans, and judges that were appointed by Democrats have been blocking what this administration's doing because it's so blatantly unlawful. And the Supreme Court, of course, some of the cases that have gone up, they've given at least a preliminary green light, either by staying some of these injunctions, but even the Supreme Court hasn't come out and said that what this administration is doing across the board is lawful. And that's very interesting, given where the Supreme Court is. So that's kind of the broad overview.
Yeah. I mean, overall, it seems like this administration has taken the idea of the unitary executive on steroids, and they're looking to have just broad power over every facet of government, from the Department of Education, all of the cuts that they've done in the Department of Health and Human Services, its heavy-handed deportation agenda. I mean, this is definitely an administration that is seeking some unprecedented powers. That's kind of my takeaway.
Absolutely, they're seeking unprecedented powers. They're operating in ways that are very unprecedented, and frankly, many of them just really not smart legal strategy. I mean, because a lot of what they're doing, they're not going through the proper process. Even judges that might be more aligned a little bit with the president's points of view are having to say, you're breaking the law, you can't do that. So we're seeing that. And then they've taken this unitary executive theory, and this is what you're referencing, they've really taken it to a new place to sort of claim that they, in some instances, don't even have to follow what the courts are saying because they're the president, and on certain issues, they don't have to follow the courts. The judges have not been, they've not taken kindly to that. And so we have, for some of the more highly publicized times in U.S. history, we've got potential contempt proceedings against, proceeding. We have a range of cases where judges are having to issue almost on a routine basis what we call show cause orders, or call the government into court and make sure they're complying. We're largely able to force them to comply through a series of things that we do in court, but it's just remarkable, and we shouldn't become numb to the fact that we have a president and an administration that really is seeking to prohibit people from having their rights protected in court. It's really remarkable.
I think that, it's worth noting that, you have had so much success in the courts, especially in the lower courts. And the Trump administration has complied, even though kind of at the beginning of this second term, there was a lot of chest beating about, from Stephen Miller and others about, we don't have to follow what judges say, we'll do what we want. But by and large, you have scored some important victories. And so the brakes on this administration have worked to at least some degree.
Absolutely. It's one thing we want people to know. I mean, you got to hold two things at once, right? It is absolutely terrible what is happening to individual people across this country every single day. And I'm sitting today in Washington, D.C., where we have unprecedented military presence, where communities are being terrorized. So I'm just going to say, we got to hold that. And on some level, the courts can be somewhat of a help in protecting individuals from what this administration is going to do. But when you have an administration that is intent on harming people and intent on sort of utilizing its own power, there's a lot of tools we're going to have to use over the next few years, and the courts are just one of them, right? People are going to have to march, protest, go to the ballot box, persist, and the courts are going to have to do the same thing. So that's one thing, and I think it's hard to feel the wins when you wake up every day and a neighbor, a loved one has faced something completely unfair. You're seeing a report about, people being removed from the country. Okay, so we have to understand that. But if you actually look at what's happened, this administration has been losing, almost 90% of the time, courts of all ideologies. And so here are some of the important wins. We blocked the national funding freeze and a range of other funding freezes. And the reason that people right now are able to get services like Meals on Wheels, to show up and have their national park open, those things, a lot of that is because of these court orders that are in place.
Yeah. And I did want to talk about that specifically because, obviously the way that spending is supposed to work for the federal government is that Congress has the power of the purse. And, this was a funding deal that was already approved and passed by Congress to fund just a massive array of programs at every level, federal, state, local. That's the way it works. And yet when Trump came into office, with his, budget guru, Russ Vought, they decided, no, we've got the right to decide how things are spent, even though this was already determined by Congress. And of course, you have Congress that's controlled by Republicans. They're rolling over on it. But, it's been the judicial branch. It's been these, court cases that have forced them to comply. But is there a precedent for this in history with an executive trying to take this approach to spending?
Not really. You've had the Nixon administration sort of toyed around with impoundment. You've had, but not really. And many instances, just doesn't even make sense. In many cases, in the vast majority of cases, the types of funding that the president has sought to deprive the American people, these essential services, they're really, really important, including for people in the president's own base, and in many communities. So, and we are seeing it across the board. So we've had to litigate this in the education context. We've litigated it overall. We've litigated it in the, climate and infrastructure context. But we've succeeded and we're succeeding, and those cases are ongoing, but those court orders are in place. We also are really, working to and have scored a lot of wins in prohibiting this administration's retaliatory conduct and its violations of the First Amendment. So some examples are the administration, got mad at the American Bar Association, the professional organization for lawyers, because the American Bar Association's longstanding position, as is consistent with the ethics codes that we all swear to when we become lawyers, is that you have to abide, uphold the rule of law, defend the Constitution, these basic things that shouldn't be controversial, but are controversial to this administration. So they retaliated against the ABA, cut off some of their funding for some programs that they utilized. We've been able to secure a court order finding that was a violation of the First Amendment. The government has backed off and committed to restoring that funding. You've seen law firms in their cases be able to bring cases. Every single case that the law firms have brought, the ones that had the moral courage to fight the administration, they've been winning on these First Amendment grounds. So one big area that is important that we, stay attuned to, because the attacks on the First Amendment, on our very freedom to sort of express ourselves, are so many, but we have been able to win court orders there. We're protecting religious communities that with a court order that's keeping ICE out of their houses of worship, and we've filed another case on behalf of more religious communities to do that. We've blocked some of these policies that would prolong family separation. So there are a lot of wins, and we encourage folks to follow democracyforward.org to learn more about those. But it doesn't take away some of the real pain that people are feeling and experiencing, and I think that's why it can be hard to see some of the wins through all that's going on.
Right. And there's just been such a sweeping attack on immigrant rights. And, we've seen ICE, going into LA, and, you've actually had Marines on the ground there, and the National Guard. And there are just countless stories of ICE going into neighborhoods all over the country and just snatching people, and sometimes people who are legally here or even citizens. And so with all of this going on, I know it is hard to feel like there are some victories in court, because not only are we seeing this now, but let's face it, it's going to get worse. The budget that Congress passed gives ICE $175 billion, basically for a private police force that we've never seen before. And so what other court actions in terms of this deportation agenda have you scored some victories on? Because I think this is just one of the more visceral issues for us in terms of like how things have changed in the last 8 months.
Well, look, I mean, we are litigating alongside the ACLU the case that's taken on sort of a life of its own, where the president sought to invoke the Alien Enemies Act and remove people without process. And we've had some victories in that case, and then we've had some setbacks with the administration's lack of compliance with orders. They're frankly not being truthful with the court, even about whether the United States had custody or control over these individuals, whether they were moved to El Salvador. They said the U.S. didn't have control. The El Salvadorans filed a document at the United Nations that suggested that the U.S. does have control. We had to bring that to the attention of the court. So there's a range of things there. But what I would say, one of the things that's happened as a result of that litigation is that people were able to see for the first time what was going on. Now it's a little more obvious because you have the National Guard and you have all of the ICE. But at that time, it was still seen that, quote, immigration was some issue that the president was able to utilize to divide people. And what we saw in the JGG case, which is the case of the 50 men that were removed without process, is once the story started coming out, I mean, many of these people just had tattoos and were brown. They weren't violent criminals. There was a report that the Cato Institute put out that showcased the lack of any type of violent criminal record, for a lot of people. It really started, I think, breaking down the president's narrative, and then people started telling their stories, and families started speaking out, and people started seeing the videos, and all of this was because we were able to get into court and expose what was happening. And then you had people like Joe Rogan who've come out and said, like, are we becoming these monsters? What's happening? So I think that this is a powerful, yes, we look to the courts to block unlawful activity and to protect our rights. And we've seen the Supreme Court, 9 justices in different ways. They did it in a 7-2 decision, so it looked divided, but said, you can't remove somebody from the country without giving them some type of process. Like our due process clause does mean what it says. So you've seen those types of things happen. But more than that, I think what we've seen is the American people, because of this litigation and because of what's been revealed, the American people be able to catch their breath and say, like, we may disagree on certain policy issues. We may disagree on immigration policy issues, but this shocks the conscience and shocks the conscience, and it's not who we are. And I think the president now faces a real political liability around some of these decisions in ways that people might not have thought that he would. And I think that's very positive.
Right. We've definitely seen the president's poll numbers have been going down, especially this summer, on immigration, obviously on the economy that has taken a huge hit when that was, supposed to be a big issue for him in terms of fighting inflation and, thanks to his tariff policies and, I think some of these really severe cuts that are coming down in the budget, clearly it hasn't been a real engine for growth. And so I think that, one thing that is important for folks is, to see that there still is some way to push back.
Yes.
And that's what, a lot of these cases are showing. And, we still do have that First Amendment. We still can protest. And, we still have agency here in what we want our country to be. And it seems to me, I'm curious about your take, that I don't think that Trump really anticipated that his policies would be as unpopular as they were, and that has kind of affected him, and maybe not given him complete pause, but he does seem to be very driven by polls.
Well, I think one of the reasons you see this very intimidating conduct right now is because they are losing on so many of the issues. And we knew that, by the way. Project 2025 was so unpopular that in the election, President Trump had to say, I don't even know what this is, right? Because the vast majority of people in this country, while they may not sort of have the same views of particular candidates on issues, they're pretty aligned. And that's an uncomfortable fact for an administration that wants to divide people, that wants to sort of build power off of division. But that is the case, and it's almost that they forgot that. And so as a result, there's a lot of trouble. I mean, the number one, I've studied autocracies and we have studied history. We've studied our own country, which of course has in its history these strains of autocracy, whether you talk about the enslavement of Black Americans, the lack of civil rights for people, the anti-immigration crusades in prior decades in our history. So just to be clear, we're not precious here either. And when you study these movements, whether they're here or abroad, the number one thing that a political actor that wants to wield and abuse power wants people to believe is that they don't have any power. They don't have any agency, that their voice doesn't matter. And our history and social science just tells us the exact opposite. One person standing up and being a lone dissenting voice can give confidence to a lot of people to do that same thing. And we just saw that in Texas, where one individual had the guts to sit in the Texas House and say, you're not going to surveil me for doing my job. And you saw the rallying cry that came forward. And we see that day in and day out. And we see that in our work, that there's ways to push back. And so I think that you're right. It's hard to hold that when we also see the pain and suffering of people, which this administration is just intent on doing.
Mm-hmm.
But people do have power, and we are seeing really remarkable resistance in many ways. I mean, the courts themselves are holding up way more than most people thought. Judges of all stripes, lawyers coming forward, but also, I mean, look at the mobilizations. The No Kings March was, I think, either the largest or the second largest mass mobilization in history, and we were not even at 200 days. Mm-hmm. So don't need to let up. But I think for all these people that are like, do calls matter? Do marches matter? It all matters. And we all have the power to do something. And I think that the administration is desperate and grasping for straws, which is why we see this really harmful behavior that we've got to find a way to stop. But I do think that this is not going the way at day 200 that they probably thought it was going to go.
Yeah. I think that Trump thought that they would be greeted as liberators, and hasn't quite worked out that way.
Yeah.
I know that you have a long history of fighting for reproductive rights, and you actually brought the first legal action challenging a state's abortion ban after the Dobbs decision came down in 2022. I'm curious what you think the next fight in the battle for reproductive freedom is.
Well, in the courts, it's certainly going to be. I mean, look, this administration is trying to be very sketchy and cagey about what it's doing, and so we filed a ton
Again, because
requests.
they know that it's not popular.
You're going to see us there, I think. But I really think the major threat. Obviously, we've got generational work to do to rebuild rights and to rebuild law. But this administration and far-right actors, their aligned groups, networks in the state and local communities, the attacks on science and evidence and the politicization of the medical community and of what we know people need, what we learn about access to care, science, evidence, and data. It is going to, these groups have their sights on trying to take down our scientific community, our medical community, on trying to penalize doctors for doing what they're doing, penalize public health workers. And so a lot of our work is this non-sexy, non-headline grabbing work of supporting those communities at this time, as well as patient communities.
What about possibly the FDA clamping down on medication abortion, invoking the Comstock Act?
Yeah. So, I mean, so we are very active here. We represent GenBioPro, which is the generic manufacturer of mifepristone, that's continuing to have to fight in court against extremists in Texas that are seeking to take action through the courts to endanger accessibility of mifepristone. And then we've had RFK come out with a range of concerning statements, and then these sort of legal theories that really have no basis at all. I mean, but that now are getting more oxygen than they deserve. So we're on the front lines of that. I think it's a place to watch. We would encourage your listeners and viewers to go to democracyfor.org, where you can follow some of that. And what we want people to know, there are folks that are going to fight every single day to try to make things better. But it is going to take that people pressure too. And this is something where people need to be making their voices clear. We cannot have more restrictions on access to care.
Could you talk to us a little bit about some of the court challenges you've made on the education front, with like attempts to dismantle AmeriCorps and the attempts for the Trump administration to intervene in terms of, what's being taught in the classroom?
Yeah, so we've had some success here, and then we've had some setbacks, but we have basically kept the administration from dismantling AmeriCorps. We're in pending litigation right now. We've got more to do there, but we've won some initial court orders. But this administration really sees education for some reason as a threat. I think it's because they see people being educated and able to make up their minds for themselves as a threat to their power. And so we have had to litigate to try to return funds, billions of dollars in federal funds, back to the states and back to educational institutions. We've won that. We have blocked this Dear Colleague letter, which was seeking to penalize educational institutions, whether they're K through 12 schools or universities, and force them to adopt a view of civil rights that's not correct. So we've had those wins, but we've also had a few setbacks. I mean, we won a big court Court order that was sustained on appeal to stop the decimation of the Department of Education. We're still vigorously litigating that case, but the Supreme Court on its shadow docket paused that court order and allowed, has allowed the administration to proceed with some of the cuts at the Department of Education, which of course we believe are unlawful. And what we want the American people to know is there's no court that has said that what the president's doing is lawful, but we have had some setbacks in securing some of that immediate relief for people. So we're out there on all of these fronts, and would love to come back and update you on more of those cases as they continue to proceed.
Absolutely. We would love that. The last case I was interested to hear a little more about was the case that I believe you filed with the IRS data policy,
yes,
where you can share sensitive information. And I thought that one was interesting because isn't it a coalition that, includes like small businesses as well as unions, just kind of like a big ideological hodgepodge?
It's a great big coalition. That's a lot of our work at Democracy Forward, is bringing together groups that might not always work together on everything, but that are aligned in this time. And this case is really important because, we all provide information to the government because we believe and we trust it's going to keep it safe. And we've already seen DOJ misappropriate so much information, and we're litigating on that. We have a big case against to try to keep people's Social Security data protected from DOJ and from improper access. And then, of course, this is about the sharing of information that really should not be shared. And that's, and in a lot of ways, it's like, what are we after here? When people are going through the right processes, they're trying to pay their taxes, they're filing the things, they're doing what we want them to do in society, to then have the IRS weaponize that data against immigrants, provide it to other agencies that don't have the ability to access it. It's a real problem. It's unlawful. And so we're in court to fight on that. We have a great team working on that case.
Great. I wanted to give you the closing word. What do you feel like Americans need to know about what you're fighting for, and about where we're at right now, 200 days into this administration?
Well, we want Americans to know that, the future is yours, but we cannot give up. We have to continue to find ways to build community, to find courage, to stay hopeful, and to push. And we're all going to have to do things that are a bit uncomfortable. We're going to have to do things that are a bit inconvenient if we want to live in a country that is a true democracy and where all people can have freedom and thrive. We want people to know that we're in court every single day fighting for you. You can follow that work at democracyforward.org, and we're winning. Winning doesn't mean that everybody's life is immediately better. There aren't shortcuts here. I say all the time, the only way out of this thing is through it, and it's going to be really hard to do it, but we can do it together. And so we want folks to stay involved. We encourage you to please sign up for our newsletter. We don't spam you. We'll keep you involved, keep ways that you can plug in, and then to do things in your local community, because the fight for our democracy and the fight for people, it is at our front door. It is not in some place just in Washington or just at the Supreme Court. It's in our local communities, and everyone can take those steps to get active, talk to their neighbors, have some conversations, and push in this time.
Great. Yeah, I would encourage everyone to follow what Democracy Forward is doing. Also, we're part of the fight as well for democracy. So I'd encourage everyone to become a subscriber to Lincoln Square as well, if you haven't already. And Skye, thank you so much. Where can people find you on social media as well?
Yeah, so follow Democracy Forward on Instagram, on Blue Sky, on Twitter. We're in all those places, on TikTok. You can follow me directly. My name is Skye Perryman. I've got channels on all the places. And, definitely keep up with us. Our lawyers create great videos, and we try to show you snippets of what we're doing every day. We'll answer your questions if you provide them to us. So please engage with us. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for being here, Skye. And I'll look forward to talking with you about how your many, many cases are faring.
Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye.